Hey everybody, it is Thursday, November 7th. You're listening to the Mo News Podcast. I'm Moshe Mununu.
And I'm Jill Wagner. This is the place where we bring you just the facts.
And we read all the news and read between the lines so you don't have to, as we continue as a nation and around the world, to process the election and what it means.
Moshe, have you slept?
As I record this, Jill, I have had 2.5 hours of sleep in the past 2 days and hoping to get some more sleep in the coming days here. But I guess one good thing, we did get resolution relatively quickly, which I think was my prediction on this podcast, or at least I said it on the premium feed, that I had a feeling, an inkling, this was not going to be a prolonged thing, that the polls were going to move one way or another in the margin of error. And it turns out we did. And it just, throughout October, it just had this feeling of 2016 redux. And then there was that sort of last few days right before the election where you're like, oh, no, maybe she's got a shot. But for most of October, for a couple of weeks there in mid-October, it just felt like we were watching 2016 play out all over again. And it appears, that was the case, but much stronger than before than 2016. He's really improved his position across the country here. And it's, going to lead to a mandate that's much more significant than the one that he got 8 years ago.
I, too, am operating on just a couple of hours of sleep. So let's hope we make sense. And thank you, everyone, for the kind notes about yesterday's podcast. We appreciate it.
Yeah, that was a very late in the recording. A special shout out to our editor, Arian, who stayed up late with us. I was on the phone with him because I sent him a Slack message. And he's like, "Wait, what does this mean?" I was like, well, we're both like 4 something in the morning. Like, let's just talk on the phone and make sure we're on the same page here. So appreciate you, brother, for putting together a very late night edit there with us as we got the results, as we watched Donald Trump speak just after 3 a.m. Eastern time Wednesday morning.
Yeah, thank you, Arian. Much appreciated. All right, now to the headlines. Kamala Harris concedes the race with a speech at her alma mater, Howard University. But she says the fight continues. We will hear from President Biden today. He's also invited Donald Trump to the White House. What the exit polls are saying about Trump's victory, and what some Latina members of the Mo News community are saying about why they voted for Trump.
Yeah, among the many groups, nearly all American demographic groups that moved in Trump's direction this go around, you might have seen some of the slides over on Instagram and had a lot of you talking.
As for the House, it is looking like it will be in Republican control, although as of this recording, still a bit too close to call. Overseas, Israel's Benjamin Netanyahu dismisses his defense minister and protests erupt across the country. Plus, world leaders react to Donald Trump's win. And we are still watching Hurricane Rafael as it strengthens to a powerful Category 3 storm and heads to Cuba. Plus, Moshe is on this day in history.
We continue the election theme this week. Plus, Jill, we look at a couple birthdays for shows, 2 shows that I think have 2 of the best theme songs in TV history.
There's one thing we love on this podcast, Moshe. A good sitcom theme song, or maybe a drama from the 80s or 90s theme song.
Your first clue here. Neither of these shows are comedies.
Let's start with politics, though. Vice President Kamala Harris officially conceded the presidential race on Wednesday, taking the stage at Howard University following President-elect Donald Trump's victory against her in the 2024 election. Howard is where Harris graduated from, and it was supposed to be the site of her victory rally on Tuesday night. Instead, one CNN commentator said beforehand that it felt like a funeral. On Wednesday afternoon, Harris spoke for about 12 minutes. She thanked her supporters, many of whom were crying. She told young people it is okay to feel sad and disappointed, but that they must accept the results of the election.
Jill, she tried to make a point there of distinguishing herself from Trump's loss in 2020, talking about a peaceful transition of power, accepting the results. That's part of what we do here in the American system. Obviously not citing his name specifically, but again, reinforcing that in America, when you lose an election, you need to admit that you lose an election.
She also said that sometimes the fight takes a while, so that they do need to keep on fighting. She said she spoke with Trump over the phone to congratulate him, and she said that they And she said that she and her team will help Trump and his team with his transition. I want to mention President Biden has invited Donald Trump to the White House as well. Biden himself will address the nation today. Back to Harris, though, here is some of what she told supporters about what comes next.
While I concede this election, I do not concede the fight that fueled this campaign. The fight for freedom, for opportunity, for fairness, and the dignity of all people. A fight for the ideals at the heart of our nation, the ideals that reflect America at our best. That is a fight I will never give up.
And Moshe, we're also learning more from the exit polls about what went wrong for Democrats on Election Day and what went right for Republicans.
Yeah, there's a long list there in both categories, both where Trump grew the party and where Harris lost. Jill, we're talking about places like Chicago, Baltimore, New York. Not that she lost those cities, but lost a lot of ground there. The worst performance for a Democrat going back several decades, back to the 1980s in New York City and Chicago. So urban areas, rural areas, suburban areas, across all demographics. We'll get into the exit polls here in a bit. But I do want to say one thing about the transition of power here. It'll be very interesting to see if Trump takes up Biden's invitation. The two men hate each other. They hate each other's guts. But Biden is making a point here of continuing what was a longtime tradition where you invite the next president to the Oval Office, you speak before the cameras, and you begin the transition of power. That continued through 2016 as Obama invited Trump that year, despite a very divisive election that year. Trump didn't do that in 2020. He didn't invite Biden to the White House. In fact, he made the transition very challenging for the Biden folks, but Biden's trying to revive that tradition 4 years later. So will there be that face-to-face at the White House, Biden and Trump at the White House? Unclear, but still very interesting there. We'll look out for what Biden has to say and then what Trump has to say about it. Will he try to play the larger diplomat, or will he say, thanks, but no thanks? I'll move in at noon on January 20th, like is the plan. I don't need to talk to you beforehand. In D.C., they're trying to get their head around this. It was not unrealistic. It was a 50-50 election, but there were folks in the establishment in D.C. who saw Trump as an aberration, a break from what happened, a fluke, right? He won the Electoral College, but not the popular in 2016. But here, with the comeback victory, an incredible comeback we talked about on yesterday's podcast, right? Coming out of January 6th, 2 impeachments, 4 indictments, 2 assassination attempts, and so on and so forth. Trump has now established himself with this victory, and a popular vote victory at that, which we'll get to, as a transformational force here in American history. He didn't just win the Electoral College. He appears to have won the popular vote. Several million more votes are going to be coming in the coming weeks as all the states vote. California notoriously slow counter, and there's millions of votes there still to count. But Trump moved more than 1,000 counties his way. Urban, rural, Black, Latino, white, women, young. Democrats did the worst with young voters than they've done in decades. Incredibly, you wouldn't have predicted this, but Harris's only age category where she gained votes were over 65-year-olds. And it was 55 and below, 54 and below, that all moved in Trump's direction. There's not a state in the union where there was not a shift to the right. Illinois was closer than before. New Jersey was closer than before. Minnesota was closer than before. Texas went from a 5-point lead win by Trump 4 years ago to double digits this go around. There was disenchantment here with the nation's direction, this resentment against the elites. Trump here, not going to just have the White House, he's going to have the Senate here, potentially up to 54 seats, though a couple Democrats were able to defy the trends. Democrats winning in Michigan and Wisconsin, the Senate seats, despite Kamala Harris losing there. But he's going to be somewhere between 52 and 54 seats in the Senate. That gives him a little wiggle room. He doesn't have to negotiate with his own moderates, Susan Collins and Lisa Murkowski, if he's able to get above 52 there. And then the House we'll get to, but it looks like it's looking pretty likely that the House is his. Remember in 2017, and people asked this on the Instagram account, Trump had both the House and the Senate, but with Paul Ryan and Mitch McConnell and establishment Republicans, and he was new to Washington. This go around, he's going to have amenable leaders there. Mike Johnson was alongside Donald Trump on Tuesday night. He's going to have loyalists. He knows how Washington works this go around. He had it for 4 years. Then, of course, he's been, away for 4 years. But he's looking at it. He has allies there. And you hear Republicans in the House and Senate are like, listen, the guy won again and won by incredible margins. And with his win, we're, able to hold Congress. They feel loyal to him.
Moshe, I had interviewed the GOP chairman here in Nassau County. And one of the questions that I asked him a few days ago before the election was Donald Trump. Does he help or hurt the rest of the ticket, the candidates that are lower in the ticket? And immediately, without question, he said, helps. Donald Trump actually held a rally in Nassau County. All of the local elected officials were with him. And this, although New York is a blue state, particularly around the city, are purple. And I didn't know if the chairman was just putting a spin on what he was seeing, but he was correct. And in fact, Nassau County went for Donald Trump. That was something that he had predicted, much, I think, to the surprise of Democrats and other political observers. Yeah,
if you go back to 2012, the loss, second straight loss, they had lost with McCain in 2008, they lost with Romney in 2012. There was a whole, sort of postmortem Republicans did. They were like, listen, we got to be better with women, Latinos, et cetera. And they had a strategy. Trump sort of ripped up that entire strategy. He's like, no, I'm going to do it my way. And Republicans said, are you kidding me? You're going to, totally turn off a certain section of the populace. Trump's like, no, there's a different section of the populace I'm going to hit. I'm going to hit working class voters, et cetera. And he has remade that party. He has expanded the party in a way that Republican officials didn't think they could, finding more rural voters than he could, appealing to working class men. He's really just kind of reshaped American politics here. The headline number, though, that was benefiting him. 3/4 of Americans think America is on the wrong track right now. And that was Kamala Harris was trying to defy those odds. She was trying to, say, well, that's not really me. I'm going to be a new face. I'm change. The problem is she didn't really distinguish herself from Joe Biden. And so people blamed her. They're like, well, you're on the wrong track. You're with Joe Biden. You put us on this wrong track. So she lost ground from Hillary Clinton and lost ground from Joe Biden. She did even worse with women. We're talking about women voters than the prior two Democrats. Did worse than Biden with women, did worse than Clinton with women. And then you had that huge shift away from Democrats that we've seen increasingly in recent elections. But a 33-point move among Latino men to Trump, a 15-point move among Latino women to Trump. Trump also gained ground with black men. We've been talking about that thematically here. He, was able to get just enough in those urban areas, and she was not able to run up the vote in the suburbs or on college campuses in various states in order to make up for that. And so, that's very interesting here. Trump actually lost a bit of ground with white women and men. So, while there's some folks on some certain cable channels, liberal cable channels, who are like, white people, you did this to us again. White women and men actually moved a bit towards Harris this go around. It was other groups that moved towards Trump. So very interesting in terms of the demographic shift here. I mentioned the age demo. And there's a larger conversation now happening within the Democratic Party, Jill, about what they need to do, their brand problems, whether they've been too associated with being too progressive, too woke, on a variety of issues, and whether, again, they're trying to move things too quickly and making a certain segment or a significant segment of the American population uncomfortable with the speed of those moves and some of those moves. Now, what's interesting, Jill, is that you have a reality check among officials in the party who know that there's a problem here. And then you have some activists, some media figures, some Harris fans who are in a bit of, let's just say that it's not just a river in Egypt. Denial. All right, again, that first up there was Whoopi Goldberg and Sunny Hostin. Interesting word choice there. Flawless. She ran a flawless campaign. And then Joy Reid on MSNBC using the same word, flawless, noting she had Queen Latifah and she had the Beehive and she had Taylor Swift, Jill.
Look, I got a little flack for it, but I did express my views on celebrity endorsements a couple of months ago. And for anyone who thinks that a flawless campaign is an endorsement from Queen Latifah, nothing against Queen Latifah. I happen to love Queen Latifah specifically as an actress, which you may or may not agree with. But if that's your definition of a flawless campaign, there's a reason that this was a bloodbath.
She doesn't endorse anyone. And, we at the Mo News podcast still don't have the Queen Latifah endorsement.
Look, I think the more serious people in the Democratic Party are going to do a hard look at the numbers, at the data, and look internally and figure out what went wrong and how they can better reach the different populations in this country and different demographics. But yeah, obviously the celebrity endorsements, while they make for great press, they're not necessarily going to move the needle. I know I say it all the time on this podcast, but it is hard to feel really good about the economy and the way things that are going when you're dropping $300 at the grocery store every week. It just doesn't make you feel good.
And when you have Eminem, Lizzo, and Katy Perry, giving you a political speech at a rally, telling you about what you should do, given the state of things. And I think that's one of the issues here, that we heard from particularly Latina women. We got into that discussion on the Instagram thread yesterday. Some of whom said, I resent being called a racist or worse for voting for Donald Trump. That at the end of the day, people are complicated. They can say, listen, I don't like the guy. I don't like the way he talks, but he at least speaks to me and speaks to my issues and doesn't just say, you're Latino, you're Latina, you're Black, you obviously have to vote for Democrats, without actually addressing pocketbook issues, immigration. And that was particularly interesting. I think there's an assumption among a lot of Democrats is Latinos and Latinas, they're going to be against deportation. They're going to support us, the Democrats, on this issue, when many of them here legally, third generation in, fourth generation in. I heard from a fifth generation Latino from Texas. And they're like, listen, we're Americans. Our communities are overrun here. And this is an issue for us. And I know that my great-great-grandfather might be Mexican or Guatemalan or Colombian or whatever, but it doesn't automatically make me want to, have the border open to folks who are not coming here legally. And so it's a fascinating conversation. I think there's a reality check happening within the Democratic Party that you can't just say, well, you are X, so you must be with us. And so, that's one of the many things and discussions we'll have here. And they appreciated that Donald Trump, while they're not sure whether he can keep his promises, at least talked about those issues to them. He was mocked for the visit to McDonald's and the visits to the border and the variety of him in the garbage truck, right? Him wearing the hard hat and the penny in the garbage truck. But the point was that, he was sending a message to people that, I'm one of you. I'm not above you. And, for all of the issues you might have with Donald Trump as a campaigner, as somebody speaking to, Americans who 2/3 of whom say the economy is going in the wrong direction and they're having struggle paying for things, that's closer to it than, rocking out with John Bon Jovi and Bruce Springsteen and the variety of things that you saw on the Democratic campaign trail. Now, again, I'm not to say that Kamala Harris didn't also try to do that stuff and talk about her middle class upbringing. We certainly heard her answer questions like that, and Tim Walz, et cetera. But clearly it didn't take. It didn't feel genuine there. So again, fascinating as the numbers come in and they try to get a sense of what goes wrong. Then they try to get a sense of what went wrong. Jill, I will mention, having watched now a few of these presidential elections, I've seen it now happen with both parties. The thumping that Republicans took in 2008 from Barack Obama, being like, where do we even go as a party? He just shredded us. He won Indiana and some states like that. And then, of course, they come back with, of all people, Donald Trump, and then the flip back to Biden. I mean, if you look at the flip in recent American politics, we went from Carter to Reagan, and then you had an extension of Bush there, right? To Clinton, to Bush, Republican, to Obama, Democrat, to Trump, Republican, to Biden, Democrat, now back to Trump, Republican. That's what we tend to do here in America. And typically the last few presidents have also started out with a majority in Congress. Obama did in 2008, lost it 2 years later. You had Trump in 2016, majority in Congress, lost it 2 years later in midterms. Biden, 2020, majority in Congress, lost it 2 years later. And so sometimes you tend to see overreach in those first 2 years, and America then punishes you and puts a check on you in Congress. So a lot of interesting developments we're going to be watching in the coming months here.
And just quickly, I want to mention some reaction from Senator Bernie Sanders, a liberal, but he's actually an independent.
Liberal, the most liberal. Yeah.
But he at least had some introspection where he said, it should come as no great surprise that a Democratic Party, which has abandoned working class people, would find that the working class has abandoned them.
The Bernie bros, we remember them from 2016 and 2020. Bernie was pretty close to being the nominee in 2016. Could have been in 2020, actually. That was the freak out they had. And that's why there was a whole bunch of dropouts and the consolidation around Biden in 2020. But Bernie saw the same thing Donald Trump did, right? That the parties had abandoned the working class voters. And effectively, 2016 was the sign of that. Republicans went with the working class guy. Democrats did not. And so, I mean, it's a different history potentially. I mean, who knows how the Bernie Sanders v. Donald Trump race would have gone in 2016 as opposed to Hillary. But interesting debate, Jill. One of the debates Democrats are going to have here to Bernie's thing. You know what Bernie's point is? Be more progressive. That's the argument you're going to hear from Bernie Sanders and AOC. That's going to reach the working class voters. We got to stand by that. They're going to have a whole bunch of Democrats saying the lesson is go moderate. We got to reach to the middle. And that's going to be the push and pull, the tug of war within the Democratic Party, which is, and a lot of Democrats will say, no, we went way too woke and left-wing, Bernie, with all due respect. We need to moderate our positions and not talk about Green New Deal and spending trillions of dollars. And he'll be like, what are you talking about? Trump is promising like 15 trillion in new spending and putting us in debt. Americans don't care about that stuff. Let's talk about our agenda. Americans want free stuff. And so, ultimately, we need to fix big things. So the Democratic I won't call it a civil war, civil discussion right now about the state of the party is one of those other things we'll be watching.
And looking forward, Donald Trump will enter his second term with quite the mandate. As we've been mentioning, he and his team are now trying to figure out who's going to be part of their next administration. So they're starting this process of choosing a cabinet and selecting other high-ranking administration officials. To that end, Reuters put together a list of some of the top contenders for some of the key posts. Some names may be familiar. John Paulson, potential Treasury Secretary. He is a billionaire hedge fund manager and a major Trump donor. Fox Business Network's Larry Kudlow, he's being talked about as well as a potential Treasury Secretary. In terms of national security, Richard Grenell, a potential national security advisor. He's among Trump's closest foreign policy advisors.
You might know Grenell. He's very active on social media with some incendiary comments. He was a part of Trump's first administration.
A few Secretary of State options. Robert O'Brien, he served as national security advisor during Trump's first term and still has a close relationship with him. Senator Bill Hagerty, another potential Secretary of State. He's from Tennessee. He worked on Trump's 2016 transition. And he was the U.S. ambassador to Japan in the first Trump administration. And Marco Rubio, Florida senator, another name being floated as a potential Secretary of State. He's long been involved in foreign affairs in the Senate and was a contender for vice president under Trump. And then a couple of options for the Pentagon. Mike Waltz, a potential defense secretary. He is a former Army Green Beret who is currently a U.S. congressman from Florida. And a pretty familiar name, Mike Pompeo. He's another name that's being talked about as a potential defense secretary. He served as the CIA director and Secretary of State during Trump's first term. He actually wrestled with the idea of running for president himself and potentially running against Trump and ultimately decided not to do that.
Not to, and he certainly won some points with the old boss and potentially future boss here. Marco Rubio is a name I hear repeatedly. I think you can expect Marco Rubio to be a member of the cabinet here. The question is, where will they put him? You know, you'll often hear names and they'll think about, okay, I'll put you at CIA or put you at state or put you at defense, kind of circulate those names around. Rubio has aligned his worldview when it comes to Ukraine and other issues with Donald Trump's. Jill, he may make history with the first female White House chief of staff. Incredibly, in the sort of, 80-year history of White House chief of staff, there has never been a woman. Two names circulating: Kellyanne Conway, his former campaign manager from several years ago. You know her from TV. Susie Wiles, his campaign manager from this campaign. He actually brought her on stage. She managed these campaigns. She managed the campaign. Kellyanne managed previous campaigns. Both of them considered options for White House chief of staff. Also, Kevin McCarthy, remember him, former Speaker of the House. His name is being circulated as White House chief of staff as well. Vivek Ramaswamy, among those being talked about to lead the Department of Homeland Security, shares Trump's vision of hardline immigration agenda, mass deportations. Doug Burgum was also talked about for vice president. He's being talked about for agriculture, interior, some of those secretaries there. Look for also influential roles here, non-cabinet or maybe cabinet, probably not for Elon Musk, but Elon, Trump loves Elon. He spent like 10 minutes of his speech at 3 a.m. last night, just like talking about Elon's rockets and how they land. It was like a whole deviation from the script. Anyway, he's just obsessed with Elon. Like they're obsessed with each other, these two. So look for Elon Musk to be a frequent visitor.
The hands of the rocket were out and they caught the rocket.
Right, and I was on the
We
phone
need to
with someone
protect.
very important.
We need to protect our geniuses.
Yeah, it's
I think
a whole
that was
thing.
part of it.
It's if you listen to, I've listened to way too many Trump rallies of recent, but there's always like a 10-minute shtick on Elon. RFK Jr., Robert F. Kennedy Jr. You can point to that in the campaign as a key turning point that RFK was able to give him that boost in a number of those states with his supporters, particularly among women, and his Make America Healthy Again agenda, MAHA agenda. And so what role will he have with the Senate looking like it could be 53, 54 seats here? RFK is a controversial choice, but will he have the votes to get RFK through with a Senate majority like that? Perhaps. FDA, CDC, HHS, Stephen Miller, you might remember him with the shaved head, who, is also, speaks like Trump, thinks like Trump. He could play a role here. You got some other names here. Mike Lee, senator from Utah, is being talked about as an attorney general. You got the senator from Arkansas, Tom Cotton, also potential attorney general. And so you got a couple of those names too. They're being talked about. Look for that to unfold over the coming weeks. Trump likes to do an apprentice-style cabinet search where he has them come out. He plays them against each other in the media. It's a thing he does. He did it last time. Look for him to do it this time. He likes, it creates headlines, it creates a little drama for him. And so look out for that.
All right, time for the speed read from CNBC. The race to control the House is undecided, but it does appear Republicans are on the verge of securing a governing trifecta with their new Senate majority and freshly minted president-elect Donald Trump. House Speaker Mike Johnson on Wednesday said that as more results come in, it is clear that as we have predicted all along, Republicans are poised to have unified government in the White House, Senate, and House. That early confidence comes as Republicans need to win 12 more seats to maintain their majority. Democrats would need 33 more to flip control. According to NBC News' race tracker, 20 key House districts are still uncalled, and the others are so far unlikely to be flipped. Moshe, again, ultimately, it is looking like Republicans will keep control of the House, but there are a few races in California that we're still watching.
Yeah, it could be a very slim majority, like what Johnson had this go around with, a 3 or 4 seat majority. That'll make it challenging, as we've covered here on the podcast and Mo News with his House Freedom Caucus, the sort of super conservative caucus. How does Trump manage those? They'll be negotiating even internally in the Republican Party here. At the same time, Democrats still holding out hope. Hakeem Jeffries, congressman, leader of the Democrats from New York, says that they think they can pull it off, though it's looking increasingly, as we record this on Wednesday night, like the door is closing. Republicans enter the contest with a historically slim majority, and it looks like they will come out with a historically slim majority. There were super expensive races, some of these races tens of millions of dollars as they tried to flip this. And Democrats knew that Senate was going to be challenging, so they were really hoping to be able to hold a majority in the House. So that's where things stand. We'll continue to monitor that over on the Instagram feed. But key issues, the Senate handles judicial appointments, cabinet secretaries, that sort of thing. The House, involved in government funding, taxes, immigration. Trump has a whole plan for his first 100 days, including extending his tax cuts and a number of other measures. And Mike Johnson stood alongside Donald Trump on Tuesday night into Wednesday morning, saying, I will be here for you.
Now to a story that got a bit buried because of the election, and perhaps by design. This story from the Associated Press. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu on Tuesday dismissed his popular defense minister Yoav Gallant in a surprise announcement that came as the country is embroiled in wars on multiple fronts across the region. The move sparked protests across Israel, including a mass gathering that paralyzed central Tel Aviv. Netanyahu and Gallant have repeatedly been at odds over the war in Gaza, but Netanyahu has avoided firing his rival before taking that step as the world's attention was focused on the U.S. presidential election. Netanyahu cited significant gaps and a crisis of trust in his Tuesday evening announcement as he replaced Gallant with a longtime loyalist. Netanyahu saying in the midst of a war, more than ever, full trust is required between the prime minister and defense minister. Unfortunately, although in the first months of the campaign there was such trust and there was very fruitful work, during the last months, this trust cracked between me and the defense minister.
Yeah, they don't like each other one bit. They leak on each other. Gallant has been skeptical. They've been rivals in the party for a while. Gallant thinks that, Bibi should have wrapped things up in Gaza a while ago and cut a deal. He said as much. Bibi tried firing him back in 2023, as you mentioned, protests. So they sort of saved him. There were some protests again this go around. Ultimately, I don't know how much this really changes with the war approach and the various Israeli military leaders. They have had a number of successes in recent months in regards to Hezbollah, Hamas taking out their top leaders. So I don't know that this much changes. The big thing we're watching right now, Jill, less internally in Israel, and more, how will Donald Trump impact things around the world? Ultimately, here, Biden and Harris have been making requests of Netanyahu of late in regards to Gaza. And effectively, the Israelis were waiting around and saying if Trump wins, we're basically going to give the finger to Biden. So it sounds like that's going to be the case here, saying we're going to deal with the new guy. Already yesterday, Netanyahu and Trump spoke. Remember, no love lost there between Biden and Netanyahu. That said, they haven't had the best relationship in the world, Netanyahu and Trump, but much better than Netanyahu and Biden. Netanyahu putting out a statement saying Trump had the greatest comeback in history. And so they're very super excited there to have his support. Remember, during Trump's first term, he moved the U.S. embassy to Jerusalem. He recognized the Golan Heights region as Israel. He helped pass the, really put through the Abraham Accords, which opened up relations between the Israelis and Bahrain, the United Arab Emirates, and Morocco, among other countries. One country that's girding for Donald Trump in the region is Iran right now. Trump has promised more sanctions on Iran. And so there's some concern in Tehran right now about what he means. And then as we make our trip here around the world, let's head to Ukraine. Vladimir Zelensky congratulated Trump yesterday, explaining that he and Trump had a great meeting back in September at the UN. He appreciates Trump's, quote, peace through strength initiative globally. At the same time, Trump has said he's going to cut aid to Ukraine. This war needs to end. And you've heard this talk from Rubio as well, who we talked about earlier as a potential Secretary of State, saying, listen, the war needs to wrap up. Ukraine fought their best, but effectively pushing the Ukrainians, you're going to have to make concessions here. It sucks. Russia invaded you. They have no right to take your territory. But the reality is what the reality is. Trump has promised to end the war in 24 hours. It's unclear whether he can actually do that. I would say it's unlikely that he can do the 24-hour thing. But right now, there's some concern in Ukraine about what that'll mean and what sort of solution the U.S. will try to impose on Ukraine here. You had the NATO Secretary General, who's the Dutch Prime Minister, who also happens to be a former official from the Netherlands, speak out congratulating Trump, saying he's looking forward to keeping NATO strong alongside Trump. Trump has been a skeptic of NATO. He's pushed back on NATO. He's called on countries to pay their due or he won't defend them. When we were at the NATO conference, that was the big concern there, Jill, that ultimately, would Trump pull out of NATO? And so they were girding for this. They were readying for this. They were concerned about this, and this is happening now. And then, Jill, we'll head to Asia real quickly. The leader of China, Xi, called Trump yesterday to congratulate him. China putting out a statement saying they're going to continue to seek a, quote, win-win cooperation with the Trump administration. Publicly, China's saying, not a big deal who is president. Privately, they're not happy about this. Trump has promised massive potential tariffs on China that has an impact on the Chinese economy. Trump just talked about 2,000% tariffs, 500% tariffs on China as they negotiate things, how unfair China is being. So China knows that this is going to be challenging for them at a time that's already difficult economically in China. You can talk to a lot of people in China. They're having difficulty finding jobs, paying for things. And the last thing they need is tariffs from America. So that'll be interesting to watch here is what's happening there. And then bordering China, of course, is North Korea. I actually had a chance to cover the Kim Jong-un Trump summit in Vietnam a few years ago that fell apart. Will Trump approach Kim Jong-un?
You were going to say, I actually had an opportunity to interview Kim Jong-un. And I'm like, who are you?
That would have been amazing. And I would have a picture over my shoulder right now of that meeting if I'd gotten that interview. No, I was not even close to any North Korean officials. We were close to the American officials. But that summit fell apart. But, Trump's whole thing was called him Little Rocket Man. But then, it was like, I'm going to do a summit with him and we see eye to eye. And they wrote each other letters. Will he continue that? Not clear. We've talked about how North Korea has sent troops to Ukraine to fight with Putin. So there's a lot happening out there as Trump comes back to the world 4 years later. The world has changed. Some of the leaders are the same. You still got Macron and Justin Trudeau and a few others that were still there when Trump left office 4 years ago. But some newbies. And so we'll see how that all plays out.
And finally, from the Associated Press, the storm we've been watching in the Caribbean, Rafael strengthened Wednesday into a powerful Category 3 hurricane ahead of its expected landfall in western Cuba, where it was forecast to bring life-threatening storm surges, winds, and flash floods. The storm knocked out power and dumped rain on the Cayman Islands and Jamaica. The National Hurricane Center in Miami warned preparations to protect life and property should be rushed to completion. The storm had maximum sustained winds of 115 miles per hour and is moving northwest at 14 miles per hour. Forecasters expected the storm to later weaken over Cuba but then emerge in the southeastern Gulf of Mexico as a hurricane. Cubans have already been struggling with blackouts while recovering from another hurricane 2 weeks ago that killed at least 6 people in the eastern part of the island.
Yeah, Cuba having a really difficult time. The headline for all of you with Rafael is he's going to make, it looks like a very hard turn west out of Cuba. So it's going to cross Cuba, through Cuba, and then turn to the left and basically cross over the Yucatan. So there is a concern about Rafael hitting the Tex-Mex border there, the Texas-Mexico border. But the rest of you in the northern Gulf states, Louisiana, Alabama, Mississippi, look like you're in the clear. You still got to monitor to see if there's any sort of twists and turns that Rafael makes. But again, making a turn towards Mexico and potentially, down there by Corpus Christi and South Padre Island, et cetera, Texas. So we'll continue to watch that. Rafael is the 17th storm of the season, which is well above average. And that sort of was the prediction this go around. It started soft, but then really the past, couple months here, we've seen storm after storm after storm. In average seasons, he's 14 named storms. And again, we're at number 17 right now. All right, on this day in history, in 1860, Abraham Lincoln is elected our 16th president, a deeply divided country. Jill, back then the inauguration was in March. The transition period was from November to March because, we were taking horseback, so they needed more time for the transition. And so he was elected, the first Republican ever elected. But by the time he's inaugurated, a number of states in the South had seceded from the Union. So from his election in November, by the time he takes over in March into April there, he's lost a few states in the Union. 5 weeks later, the Civil War starts. Fast forward, more presidential history on this day. Reagan was reelected on this day in 1984, defeating former Vice President Walter Mondale. Jill, significant because Reagan got 525 electoral votes. He won 49 states. Mondale won his home state of Minnesota. That was it. No one has even gotten close to the Reagan blowout. So while we talk about Trump's margin this week, 525, 49 states for Ronald Reagan. Just remarkable. I cannot imagine us seeing that any time in the near future, given the way our politics have gone.
No, Moshe. It would basically put Steve Kornacki and his khakis out of a job.
Yeah, he'd be like, "You want me to zoom in on which of the 49 states? Like, we'll call it. Let's just call it 7 p.m. Let's just call the election at this juncture." Jill, speaking of NBC, one of my favorite theme songs. I love the drama here.
If it's Sunday, Moshe.
It's Meet the Press. Meet the Press, one of the oldest news shows, if not the oldest news show on television, makes its debut on this day in 1947. Jill, that is the dramatic theme of John Williams, the composer, who's composed amazing themes, going to Jurassic Park and all the various Steven Spielberg films, the Olympic fanfare song that NBC also uses. Anyway, on this day, Meet the Press begins. Regular Sunday viewing for a number of folks. And then another favorite dramatic theme song of mine. That one might be hard for you if you're just listening, but some of you might remember this. This was the first show I remember binging on DVD.
Moshe, I'm totally with you. That's 24, Kiefer Sutherland. It was supposed to be a real 24 hours, like it was happening in real time, which if it was, would have been the craziest 24 hours any human has ever had in their life.
Right. The theme continues. So they play this like little ditty at the top. And like literally it always begins like, my name is Jack Bauer and this is the longest day of my life. And it's like each episode is like 1 a.m., 2 a.m., 3 a.m. And the joke obviously was like driving around LA. And you're like, you can't get from there to there in 2 minutes. Like that would have taken at least 3 episodes to drive from, Santa Monica to,
he never uses the bathroom. He never eats.
No, not in his 24 hours. And it was a show that incredibly actually premiered just after 9/11 there in 2001. They'd conceived it beforehand, but took on obviously more resonance as a show about terrorism happening on the homeland just months after we had suffered that attack. So it was incredibly popular. Jill, a couple of musical songs we will pay tribute today on this day in 2001, also 23 years ago. Britney Spears releases her album, Britney, which has I'm Not a Girl, Not Yet a Woman, and I'm a Slave for You. I won't try to sing
I don't
either.
know why I'm laughing. It's just so like on the nose. It's too literal.
I'm not a girl and I'm not yet a woman either.
Moshe, I remember that album well.
Yeah, Britney. Peak Britney. There in 2001. And then one of my favorite songs from the Dirty Dancing album. This is an incredible album. Hungry Eyes. Now I think they use it for, is it Arby's or one of the fast food chains uses Hungry Eyes for one of their commercials.
I'll take the Dirty Dancing version. Thank you.
Jill, I just Googled it because I was wondering who used it, and it looks like Planters Peanuts has used it, McDonald's UK has used it, Applebee's has used it, and M&M's has used it. So Hungry Eyes getting a lot of play there on the commercials.
It'll always be a Dirty Dancing soundtrack to me. All right, guys. That is a wrap on this second post-election podcast. Thank you for listening to the Mo News Podcast. If you like what you hear, share this with your friends who will help us grow. Follow us and subscribe so you don't miss an episode, and review us in the App Store.
See you guys tomorrow.